It helps to have a perspective of what led to this situation. Almost a decade ago, the FDA had carried out an investigation to determine what is ailing the pharmaceutical industry. Why is it lagging so much behind the other industries in terms of quality management? And this was summed up in Wall Street Journal's cover page article, and which screamed out that big pharma manufacturing costs are 90 billion, significantly more than R&D. And they talked about the new prescription for drug makers update the plans. After years of neglect, industry focuses on manufacturing. FDA acts as a catalyst. We have the innovators, the big pharma, and when they get into drug discovery, it normally takes them close to 7 to 10 years before they reach a point in time where they are ready to validate their process. As compared to that, we have the generic manufacturers, and they are ready for process validation oftentimes in less than a year, or less than 2 years. Surely, there's a very big difference in terms of the knowledge one brings to process validation after having worked on it for 7 to 10 years, or after having worked on it for a few months. The scenario is very typical. Here you have an R&D group and you have management. And the R&D's responsibility is to file as many applications as possible within a calendar year or a fiscal year. Now he has one, let us say, an API. He takes the API, reverse engineers the API. It takes him about 3 months, and then he spends another 3 months generating the necessary data for submission. And a DMF is filed, a docket number is received, and the marketing goes into overdrive, and they try contacting as many potential buyers as possible for the item, and then every day there are samples being sent across. Nothing moves till a formulator somewhere shows interest and then moves FDA saying that I'd like to procure this raw material from your particular company. And then FDA announces the inspection. Sometimes it takes 6 months, sometimes it takes 1 year, sometimes it takes 3 years. As soon as US FDA makes the announcement of inspection, the information is immediately given to the factory that is supposed to produce it. Until that point in time, nobody in the factory had even a clue about what was filed and how many other things have been filed. And suddenly appears a technology transfer document and an intimation that get ready for validation and inspection. Here these people run around in circles trying to see how they could possibly meet the deadlines. The process is simply not working as was expected to work or as they were told it would work. So they ring up R&D and tell them, look, I'm having this problem or I'm having that problem, and the person at R&D says, hey, listen, don't bother me with all this trivia because it's a pure scale-up problem. I'm sure you people with your experience can solve it. And I have no clue about the kind of equipment you work with. I have had no such problems when I'm working at my lab level. He is working at 5 kg level. And the batch is at 400 kg. Now, when management is appraising the R&D, the owner of the company asks, so what have you to show for this year's performance? And he says very proudly, I have had 18 filings. And he says, but that's way short of what you had promised. I thought we had mutually agreed that there should be a minimum of 25 filings this year. So why are you slipping up? I don't want this to happen next year, and I want to make sure that we are talking the same language and performing towards the same goal. So the R&D man goes away crestfallen. The next day there is a review with the production group, and the owner of the company says, "Fam, what have you got to say for your performance during the fiscal year?" And he says, "I've delivered 9 tons. And he says, "Isn't that way short of what we had mutually agreed? You're supposed to have produced 14 tons. You're just at 9 tons. I don't know why this is happening, and I don't want this. I want you all to lick yourself back into shape, and next year I want to see better performance." So R&D is judged by the number of filings they are able to come up with. Production is judged by the number of tons they are able to get out of the door. And in between all this comes this. So if the production man says, "Sir, I could have done better, you see, but we were bogged down with this validation thing and we had a lot of problems here, etc." Management is not willing to listen to all that. Now let's take a case where the relationship between the manufacturing and R&D is very good in this company. And instead of being abrupt and self-absorbed, the R&D person actually is very outgoing and ever willing to help. And the manufacturing person is able to somehow cajole the R&D head to spend some time on the shop floor to solve the problem. Then he goes across over there and sits there for 3 weeks till the issues are resolved and the validation is completed successfully. What do you think happens then? At the end of the month, there is the monthly appraisal and review. And the owner asks the R&D man, "So what have you got to show for this month?" And he says, "Sorry, this month I was preoccupied. Where were you? I was in the factory. What were you doing there? They were having some problems on the process, and for 3 months they've been struggling. I went there and in 3 weeks I sorted everything out." He thinks management is going to be very happy. And instead, what do you think the management says? Excuses. I'm sick of these excuses. Now, next month you'll be giving me some other excuse. Now, when are we ever going to get anything out of the door in terms of R&D? What are you going to give me? I don't want such excuses. If the man in production does not know how to produce, I'll find somebody else. Your job is to stay put and do your work. I don't want you to get distracted. I don't want to hear of this one more time. The FDA has taken note of this situation. The same thing with the formulator. Reverse engineer a formulation, submit the data, backed by showing correspondence between the innovator product and this product, and it is filed, and then the FDA announces inspection, and the whole ball is thrown into a court where people are not yet ready to receive the ball. The QC person complains that he doesn't have the reference standards, he doesn't have the reagents, he doesn't even have the instrument. R&D has the instrument, but we don't have that instrument, and so on and so forth. So there is a whole pile of confusion. This is one element that the regulators wish to address. They want management to facilitate knowledge transfer. They are aware that knowledge resides somewhere in the organization, but does not always find its way to the shop floor where it is needed. So manufacturing arm is not always supported by the knowledge that is there in another wing of the company somewhere else. The conduit has necessarily got to be management. So in the management review, the regulators would like to see whether management has had a way in which they are looking at R&D efforts, looking at production performance, and more importantly, as to how smoothly technology is transferred from R&D to the shop floor. Or are there hiccups? And if there are, is management aware of it? And what is management doing about it? They want management to lead. This is one aspect of pharmaceutical validation as is expected today. Now there's one more. You see, ever since this concept of validation came, close on its heels came the element of qualification of systems, equipment, utilities, facilities, premises, instruments, etc. And that was elaborately broken up into a design qualification and an installation qualification and an operational qualification and a performance qualification. Now, if something was critical or deemed critical and could have an impact on the product or process, it would be included in the qualification regime. And if it was not deemed to be significant, then it would go under what is called routine engineering, installation and commissioning. Now, there were some commonalities between installation and commissioning and qualification. There were also some major areas of differences. Let's have a quick recap as to how things have been till now. Whether it's commissioning or qualification, the commonalities are the lists of equipment, lists of components, verification reports for utilities, system drawings, operating procedures, calibration records, input-output testing, loop checks, alarm testing, operation sequencing, and integrated system testing. The principal differences were that in commissioning, it was predominantly a supplier responsibility. The objective was to identify and fix problems. No formal protocol was required. All the data and documents were supplier generated. Not all data was recorded or reviewed. Usually there was no written report at the end of the exercise, and it was usually reviewed, accepted by the engineering group and done with. At the moment it came to qualification, it says that it is the user's responsibility and the documents are user generated. It must follow a protocol and all data and changes to be reviewed and approved, and a written report was required. But in reality on the ground, was this the way it was really done? Where all the documents, the DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ, generated by the user. This is what happens. You have a tender floated for, let us say, a certain water system, and ever so many people quote, and then finally the order is decided on a particular supplier. Now, even before the order is typed, the man from procurement rings up the company and says, hey, I want to congratulate you, your order is more or less through, it should be released in the next day or two. In the meantime, I've got a request from our QA manager, and he says he'd like you to send across, courier across as quickly as you can, all the protocols and documentation. The supplier is naturally very happy. He thanks the man on the other end, and the person calling says, okay, now when can I expect this documentation here? So the supplier says, don't worry sir, I'll make sure that it is handed over to the courier by this evening. You should be getting it tomorrow. And what does he do? He goes across, opens his documents, which is usually in Word format, and he goes there into the document and then says, find and replace with. Find ABC Pharmaceuticals Limited, Delhi, replace with XYZ Biologicals Limited, Mumbai. He generates a document and sends it across. 5 days later, the procurement man is back on the line and he says, listen, I've received all these documents, it has been passed on to QA, they've had a good look at it. But our QA people are saying that it's not in the format that they would like it in. So what I'm doing now is I'm sending you a template of the way in which your documentation should be arranged. And please see that it is redone and sent back to us as quickly as possible. In the meantime, your order should be released today or tomorrow, and I'll see that that is done. Now, this is how the so-called qualification protocols and documentation have been generated, and mainly to show it to auditors and to regulators, with no bearing whatsoever on the actual fitness for use of the system or equipment or instrument, or the facilities or utilities that are being discussed. And lastly, the qualification exercise comes to an end only after it has been reviewed and accepted by QA. Here we are talking about an engineering-based exercise. And the person who is reviewing and approving is not necessarily an engineer or with any kind of engineering background, and yet it is he who is reviewing and approving. We had a problem in one company recently where when everything had been put in place and the process was trying to be validated, an attempt was being made to validate that process, that validation exercise was getting nowhere. And they called in some experts, they looked at the entire system and said, hey, listen, the quality of water that this design is giving you is not adequate for this process. You can't possibly be doing this without an RO unit and an EDI unit, and for good measure maybe an ultrafiltration unit. But with the kind of design that you have got, that system cannot possibly give you the quality of water that you need for this process, and that's why you're having this problem. And this is because the water system had been reviewed and accepted by the head of QA, not by a subject matter expert. So where does this leave us? Has pharmaceutical validation, as it has been traditionally practiced, has it had any effect or benefit towards product quality or process quality? The answer is a big maybe, maybe not. The owner of the company identifies a site. As soon as he has identified the site and got possession, he appoints a project manager and the technical head who might head that particular plant. And they go about their job, they consult nobody. And the building comes up, and the equipment arrived, and all this takes a year or two. And just when everything is right, they appoint somebody called the QA manager. And what is his responsibility? Documentation, validation. And that poor person runs around like a chicken without a head. Is that the way it is supposed to be done? The validation master plan is written at that time and just kept ready to show it to the regulators or auditors. Is that the way it is supposed to be done? Here is the regulators' assessment. Their assessment of what were the shortcomings in the past and what is the status in the industry, an assessment of the situation. Observed shortcoming in traditional validation. DQ, IQ, OQ, PQ, one followed by the next step, having reduced mostly to quality assurance and regulatory functions. The focus on these documentation and exercises appears to be on satisfying the regulator and auditor rather than on improving quality. Processes are being held in a state of control, but little knowledge available about why or how they manage to attain that state. Materials used are not well characterized. Process factors are not well understood. Cause of variability in the process not well investigated. Development trials treat processes as univariate systems rather than multivariate systems. Manufacturing technologies are archaic, poor production efficiencies and utilization, wastages are high, and costs of manufacturing compliance are high. The industry is collecting enormous data, but little analysis or efforts towards conversion of data to meaningful, usable information or knowledge. Now they have realized where they went wrong in terms of the so-called worst case of envelope testing, border testing. 3 successful rounds. They have recognized that data is not knowledge unless context is also provided. The traditional regulatory model has been to provide the data showing that the process has appropriate controls established. The underlying context would be necessary to show how the data was coupled with other elements and the assumptions made. For example, the 3 successive runs have been identified and the process deemed validated. But where is the critical edge or the edge of failure of the process? If that were known and superimposed on this envelope, We see here a very disturbing situation where 2 points on the envelope are on the edge of failure, and one side of the envelope is perilously close to the critical edge. Loss of parametric control anywhere along the upper envelope could lead to the process going out of control and the batch failing. Dr. Janet Woodcock of US FDA has compiled this table, and she has made an assessment of what is the current manufacturing quality level and the quality to be provided to patients, the desired quality level shown in green. Now she makes an estimate that the current process capability ratio in the pharmaceutical industry is hovering in the band of 0.33 to 0.67, and she would like to see this improved to the range of around 1.25 to 1.55. She has shown you a column where she talks about defects per million, and at the current manufacturing state or quality level being maintained in the industry, the defects could be as high as 308,537. And she'd like the industry to tighten up its processes and bring down the defectives to a level that is more acceptable in the range of 233, preferably down to 3.4 defects per million. Now, where did she get these figures from? Now, you do your own analysis, and I guarantee that you're likely to find, like I gave an example of viscosity, 0.17 to 0.18, that your process capability ratio is perhaps around 0.8. Maybe it is even 1. Now, why is she saying it is in the range of 0.3 to 0.7? It's because of what I told you. You made an estimate based on the sample records that you have reviewed. Your estimate, if you've taken 70 records, could be off by 10%, plus or minus. If it is plus, it's okay. But if it is minus, that you have overestimated, then you have to discount that 10%. So from a process capability ratio that you have arrived at, which is 1, you take away 10%, it is 0.9. From that, the Six Sigma gurus have told you, you must take away 0.5. The reason being that 3 sigma drift, 1.5 sigma this side or 1.5 sigma this, is natural to any process, and it is not statistically deemed significant. Therefore, you factor that out in the beginning itself. So from your upper specification limit and your lower specification limit, remove 3 sigma and treat that as your reals. So from 0.9, if you take away 0.5, you will end up with 0.4. That's exactly what Dr. Janet is talking about. Now, in learning theory, it is commonly known that as you start learning something, you start learning very rapidly. Your knowledge level improves very rapidly. But as you keep on learning, the slope of the curve flattens out, and finally you reach a plateau. There's an equation for that particular rise of the curve, and as in the case of immunization, even in learning, you give one booster shot, and after a certain period of time there's some decay. You give a second booster shot and it rises up, and then it decays, and you give a third booster shot, and then it reaches the plateau. So seldom do you get more than 3 booster shots. Similarly, in school or college, you have a teacher teaching a subject, and then there is a test. So you have to prepare. And then after some time, your knowledge level goes down. Then there's a midterm test. So you prepare all over again. So your knowledge level goes up, your comprehension improves. And then it starts decaying. And then you have the end of the semester test. And then it goes on to a level beyond which you more or less have understood the subject. The same thing is true in process understanding. Initially, when you develop a process, your knowledge is raw. And this curve, learning curve, is steep. Now, if you see this diagram here on the lower left, you see that there is a certain variable on the input side on the x-axis. And that when projected onto the learning curve and then extrapolated onto the y-axis, which is your output curve, you find that there is the transmission of the variability from the input side to the output side. Now, if you look at the curve on the lower right, you see a certain variability introduced on the input side in the early stages of process development and process understanding. And that, when projected onto the learning curve and extrapolated, you find that the variability on the y-axis or the output is amplified. You have a certain variability on the input side, and the variability on the output side is much wider. There is an amplification taking place. But when the same variability is introduced in a mature phase of your process understanding, then you find that projected onto the learning curve and then extrapolated onto the y-axis, you find that the variability, though it is the same as it was earlier on the input side, now gets damped to an almost insignificant level. That is what process understanding does for you. Now, a process is deemed to be well understood when all critical sources of variability are identified, explained, and controlled. Variability is managed by the process itself. Product quality attributes can be accurately and reliably predicted. Now, what are the benefits of process understanding? Process understanding is inversely proportional to process variability. The higher your understanding, the lower the variability. Process understanding is inversely proportional to risk of poor product. That is, higher the understanding, the lower the risk. The lower the understanding, the higher the risk. Now, because of the risk to poor product, process understanding is inversely proportional to patient risk. So the higher your process understanding, the lower is the risk transmitted to the patient in the field. Process understanding ensures a high level of assurance of quality on every batch and provides alternative, effective mechanisms to achieve and enhance process validation. Process understanding provides a basis for reduced or less restrictive regulatory approaches to manage change. So, in Dr. Janet Woodcock's summation of October 5, 2005, describing the kind of pharmaceutical environment and industry that she would, along with her colleagues, envisages, the desired state that the regulators are envisaging, they want a maximally efficient, agile, flexible pharmaceutical manufacturing sector that reliably produces high-quality drug products without extensive regulatory oversight. Now, on the basis of all these assessments, the regulators had issued in November 2008 a draft Pharmaceutical Validation Compliance Policy Guide. It's a draft. And they had circulated it for comments and had hoped to be able to receive all comments. They had said the deadline is somewhere in February 2009, maximum March 2009. And in April, May or June, they would sit and review all this before finalizing it as the final rule or final guide. But it is now June of 2010 and that process has yet not been finalized, perhaps because of extensive discussions between industry and regulators. But whatever it may be, this is one document that is perhaps the finest that has come out from the regulators. If the industry is able to adopt and embrace the guidance given here, then the pharmaceutical manufacturer can take his rightful place amongst the League of Nations, League of Industry, the leaders in the quality movement, because now the pharmaceutical industry will be operating as well as any other leader in the quality movement in any other industry. Now, what does this policy guide factor in? It factors in ICH Q8 so that your process has quality designed into it, quality by design. It factors in ICH Q9 so that you know how to prioritize and you know how to do quality risk management and dovetail or align your pharmaceutical validation activities such that it takes into account the Q9 guidelines. And it also takes in ICH Q10, which is about the pharmaceutical quality system, with management driving the quality movement in the company or in the industry, and where scale up is a major issue, Capa is a major issue, technology transfer is a major issue, and you talk about a product's quality from the time of its inception in the R&D right up to its retirement in the post-commercial phase. It seeks to encourage managing processes by process endpoints rather than time-based. For example, you have a blender. You're looking for blend uniformity. They would encourage you to stop the process when that blend uniformity has reached its predetermined specifications, rather than 30 minutes or 15 minutes at so-and-so RPM. Not time-based. They want it endpoint-based. So they've allowed room for encouraging process analytical technologies to play a role in the design and management of your process. And lastly, they brought in this ASTM E2500 specifications for pharmaceuticals and biopharmaceutical facilities, and encourages the users to refer to that document when it comes down to their facilities and to their processes. As far as the approaches to validation are concerned, it retains the pre-market or prospective validation as one valid approach. Concurrent validation is very much in place. Retrospective validation has been dropped. And revalidation post-approval in the market, when the product is already in the market and you brought about changes here, they've replaced the concept of revalidation by a process of continued verification.